Ladies and gentlemen, me. There comes a time in every life when the noise of the world grows faint, and all that remains is the profound, often unsettling, silence of the soul. It's in that silence that we often find ourselves asking the deepest, most aching questions. Why, when, how, and most pointedly, where is God in all this? But let me ask you something tonight. What if that silence is not abandonment but alignment? What if it is not a void but a vessel, waiting to be filled with the lessons only silence can teach? We live in a world that glorifies noise. The hum of ambition, the clamor of achievement, the endless buzz of connectivity, these are the sounds we have grown accustomed to. They comfort us, distract us, and sometimes deceive us. They convince us that movement equals progress, that sound equals significance. But what happens when all of that is stripped away? When the calls go unanswered, when the plans fall apart, when the prayers seem to echo back empty? What happens when God seems silent? Let me tell you this, it is in those moments, those long, quiet stretches of uncertainty that growth begins. True, transformative, soul-deep growth. Not the kind of growth you can measure in accolades or bank accounts, but the kind that redefines who you are and what you are capable of. The silence of God is not his absence, it is his presence in disguise. It is his way of preparing you for the weight of the blessing he is about to bestow. It is his method of stripping away the distractions, the doubts, and the dependencies that would otherwise keep you from stepping into the fullness of your potential. You see, silence is not a punishment. It is a process. Now, some of you may be thinking, that's easy to say when you're standing in the light, but what about when you're stuck in the dark? I understand. I've been there. We've all been there. That place where the silence feels like a prison, where every step feels like sinking deeper into the unknown. But let me remind you of something powerful. A seed cannot grow in the sunlight alone. It begins its journey underground, buried in darkness, surrounded by silence. And it is there in the quiet, unseen spaces that the miracle of transformation takes place. It is there that roots are formed, strength is built, and life begins. God's silence is not his way of leaving you, it is his way of leading you. Leading you to dig deeper, to stretch farther, to reach higher. Leading you to discover the strength you didn't know you had, the faith you didn't know you needed, and the purpose you didn't know was waiting for you. Certainly, let's delve deeper into this exploration of God's silence as the catalyst for growth. When we think of silence, we often associate it with discomfort, with uncertainty, even with fear. Silence has a way of making us confront the things we try to avoid, the doubts, the insecurities, the unanswered questions. But it is precisely in this confrontation that growth begins. Think about the most powerful moments in your life. Were they born in noise, or did they rise from quiet reflection? Did they emerge from constant chatter, or did they come to life in the stillness of your soul? God's silence is not the end of the conversation, it is the beginning of transformation. When we pray, we often expect an immediate response, a sign, a word, an action. But what if the silence is the answer? What if it's God's way of telling you, now it's your turn? What if it's his way of saying, I've given you the tools, the wisdom, and the strength. Now use them. You see, silence is not an empty space. It is a space filled with potential. It is the canvas on which your faith is painted, the soil in which your spirit takes root. In the silence, you learn to listen not just to the voice of God, but to the voice within yourself. And here's the truth. My friends, God's silence is not about him, it's about you. It's about your growth, your journey, your becoming. Let me tell you a story. There was a young man who felt called to do great things. He prayed fervently, asking God to guide his steps, to open doors, to make the path clear. But all he heard in return was silence. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and still, there was no answer. Frustrated, he decided to give up. He stopped praying, stopped hoping, stopped believing. But one day, as he sat in the quiet of his own despair, he began to notice something. He noticed that the silence wasn't empty. It was filled with questions not from God, but from himself. What are you afraid of? What are you waiting for? What do you need to let go of? In that moment, he realized that the silence wasn't a void, it was a mirror. It was showing him the things he needed to confront, the things he needed to change, the things he needed to grow beyond. And so he began to answer those questions. He faced his fears, he took action. He let go of the things that were holding him back. And as he did, he found that the silence began to shift. It wasn't that God had started speaking, it was that he had started listening. God's silence is not about withholding answers, it's about drawing you closer to the source of all answers. When the noise of the world is stripped away, when the distractions are silenced, you are left with one thing, your relationship with God. And in that relationship with strength, everything you need, faith, strength, purpose, and yes, even peace. But let me warn you, the process of growing in silence is not easy. It will test you. It will stretch you. It will make you question everything you thought you knew. There will be moments when you feel like giving up, moments when the silence feels unbearable. But it is in those moments that you must hold on. You must trust that the silence is not a punishment, it is a preparation. Because here's the thing, growth is never comfortable. It requires you to step outside of what you know, to push beyond what you think you can handle, to embrace the unknown with faith and courage. And God's silence is the perfect environment for that kind of growth. Now let me take you deeper into the heart of this idea. Growth requires resistance. A tree grows strong not because the sun shines endlessly, but because the wind pushes against it. The roots of that tree dig deeper into the earth to stabilize it against the forces trying to topple it. God's silence, my friends, is that wind. It pushes you to stand firm, to dig deeper, to anchor yourself in faith. When you find yourself in seasons of silence, you begin to realize that the answers you seek are not external, they are internal. The silence forces you to rely not on what you hear, but on what you know. It forces you to look inward, to examine your motives, your intentions, your purpose. Do you know who you are when the noise stops? Do you know what you believe when the world grows quiet? Do you know where your strength lies when you feel like you have none? These are the questions that God's silence asks of you. These are the questions that lead to your greatest growth. And let me tell you something, when you start to embrace the silence, when you stop fighting it and start listening to it, something incredible happens. You begin to hear the whispers of your own soul. You begin to see the path that was always there, hidden beneath the noise. You begin to understand that God's silence was not a lack of communication, but a deeper form of it. Think about the heroes of faith. Abraham, who waited decades for the promise of a son. Joseph, who endured years of silence and slavery in prison before stepping into his destiny. Moses, who spent 40 years in the wilderness before God called him to lead. In each of their lives, silence was not the end of their story, it was the beginning of their transformation. It was in the silence that their faith was forged, their character was refined, their purpose was revealed. And so it is with you. When God is silent, it is not because he has forgotten you. It is because he is preparing you. Preparing you for the weight of the blessing, the responsibility of the calling, the fulfillment of the promise. But here's the catch, you have to participate in the process. You can't just sit in the silence and wait for something to happen. You have to engage with it. You have to ask the hard questions, face the uncomfortable truths, take the bold steps. Because growth doesn't happen by accident. It happens by intention. God's silence is an invitation to grow, to trust, to become. It's his way of saying, I believe in you. I know you're ready for this. Now show me what you can do. And when you accept that invitation, when you lean into the silence and embrace it, you discover something extraordinary. You discover that the silence was never empty, it was full. Full of lessons, full of opportunities, full of God's presence. You begin to see that his silence was not a withdrawal, but an investment. An investment in your strength, your faith, your future.